The song was #1 in 17 countries. Her voice was playing on every radio station from Los Angeles to Tokyo. There were tour buses and hotel corridors and press conferences and a manager who had started calling her at 6 in the morning to read her chart positions before she had finished her first cup of tea. There was a version of her life, in the autumn of 1983, that felt like it had become enormous, broader than any single life should be, louder than the inside of any single human head could comfortably contain. And then, one unremarkable Tuesday morning, Bonnie Tyler got into a car and drove back to Skewen. She didn't call ahead. She didn't tell the label. She told Robert where she was going, and he nodded the way he always nodded, not asking, not needing to, understanding in the way that a decade of marriage had built into them. And she drove south out of the city while the radio played a song by someone else, and she was grateful for it. What she was going back for, she could not quite have said. But she knew, in the particular way that people who have left somewhere always know, that the place she had come from was the only place in the world that could give her the thing she was suddenly, quietly, running low on. It had started. The need for it, the ache of it, on a night in New York that should have been the best night of her career. August. The Ritz-Carlton, 43rd floor, a room she could not have imagined affording 5 years earlier, with a view of the city spread out below her like something that belonged in a film she hadn't auditioned for. Jim Steinman had called that evening to tell her the news. Total Eclipse of the Heart had debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Not climbing, not hovering. #1 first week. The biggest chart entrance a song had made in the United States in years. She had said the right things. She had made the right sounds. She had told Jim it was extraordinary, because it was, and she had meant it, because she meant most things she said. Then she had hung up the telephone and stood at the window for a long time, looking at a city of 8 million people, every one of them anonymous from the 43rd floor, and she had felt something she had no immediate name for. It was not unhappiness. She wanted to be precise about that, even in the privacy of her own thoughts. It was not ingratitude either, or distance, or the peculiar numbness that people sometimes describe descending after a long-awaited triumph finally arrives. It was something subtler and more physical than any of those words. The feeling of standing very high up in a place that did not know her name, after a day of being known everywhere, and noticing that those two states could exist at exactly the same time. She had stood at that window for the better part of an hour, and somewhere in the middle of it, without quite deciding to, she had thought about her mother's kitchen. Skewen had not changed, which was both exactly what she had expected and, somehow, still slightly startling. The world she had left behind had the quality of places revisited in dreams, familiar in the bones but rearranged in small, specific ways that only someone who truly knew it would catch. The colliery winding tower was still on the horizon. The terrace rows still climbed the hillside in the same uneven lines. The chapel on the corner still had the same slightly lopsided gate that had never been properly fixed in all the years she had been alive. The sky was doing what the sky did over that valley most days, low and gray and particular, the kind of sky that pressed down close rather than lifting away, the kind she had spent years learning not to miss. She parked the car on a side street rather than the main road, without consciously deciding to, a muscle memory gesture. The instinct of someone who had grown up in a place where everyone knew everyone's car, and who was not entirely sure yet what she wanted this morning to be. She sat for a moment with the engine off. The street outside was an ordinary Tuesday morning street, a woman in a housecoat putting a milk bottle on her step, 2 children in school uniforms arguing about something at a pace too quick and too Welsh to follow through glass, a van making a delivery to the corner shop 3 doors down, the driver whistling something tuneless. Nobody was looking at the car. Nobody was looking at her. For the first time in months, Bonnie Tyler understood with her whole body rather than just her head what it felt like to be nobody. It felt, to her considerable surprise, like taking off a coat she had been wearing too long. She got out of the car. She had dressed that morning without thinking about it, which meant she had dressed like Gaynor Hopkins rather than like Bonnie Tyler, which meant jeans and a plain dark wool coat over a simple jumper, hair tucked behind her ears rather than styled, no stage wardrobe, no press appearance armor. She had not done this deliberately, or perhaps she had, below the level of deliberateness, in the way that the body sometimes knows where you're going before the mind has caught up. The air smelled the same. That was the first thing that reached her, walking away from the car. Coal and damp stone and something green on the wind from the hillside. The particular compound of that valley that she had carried, apparently, as a sense memory through every stage of her life without realizing it. Until now, breathing it again, she understood that she had been carrying it. There was a baker's shop on the corner that had not been there when she left, the only visible change she immediately identified, and the smell from it was fresh bread and something warm with butter, and she stopped without meaning to and stood in the smell of it for a moment. A man in a flat cap passed her going the other direction, head down against the gray morning air, not glancing up. A young mother pushed a pram past the baker's, absorbed in the effort of the pram on the cobblestones, not looking sideways. A dog crossed the road ahead of her at a diagonal, with the specific unhurried confidence of an animal that knows its own village. She walked. There was no particular plan for the walking. She moved through the streets the way she had moved through them as a girl. Not toward anything, not away from anything. Just through, the way you walk in a place that does not require you to navigate because you have already metabolized its every corner. She passed the end of her parents' old street without deciding to. She paused at the corner and looked down the terrace row without going in. Someone had painted their front door red. Otherwise, it was the same row it had always been, gray and close and steady, chimneys trailing thin smoke into the low sky. She had not called her parents first either, which she now recognized might have been slightly unreasonable. She would do it, but not yet. This particular part of the morning was, she understood now, only for her. The encounter happened on the street that ran behind the colliery welfare hall. She almost didn't take that route. There was no reason to go that way specifically, except that her feet remembered it from years of Friday nights, and she was letting her feet navigate rather than her head, which meant that she walked around the corner of the hall and directly into the path of Mrs. Anwen Davies. Mrs. Davies was 81 years old, or somewhere near it. Age had a way of becoming approximate after a certain point, the details loosening even as the character remained entirely fixed. She was a small woman, barely reaching Bonnie's shoulder, with white hair pinned back in a practical bun and a face that had been collapsing gently into itself for the better part of 2 decades without losing any of its sharpness. She wore a dark bottle green wool coat that was too large for her and clearly belonged to a warmer, larger person than she had recently become. And she was carrying a cloth shopping bag in one hand and a walking stick in the other, both deployed with the air of someone who uses them purely as a matter of principle rather than necessity. She looked up at Bonnie the way very old women look at people they are trying to place, directly, without embarrassment, giving the task the full attention it deserved. "Gaynor Hopkins," she said, not a question. Not the exclamatory noise of sudden recognition. The kind of sound that had been following Bonnie through every airport and hotel lobby for months. Simply a name, stated in the tone of someone who had always known it, and saw no reason to be surprised to encounter it again. "Mrs. Davies," Bonnie said. "I didn't think you'd still be alive," the old woman said dryly. "I'm 81, not extinct. You look well. You look a bit thin, mind. There are people in the world, very few of them, and you mostly know them only from childhood, who are constitutionally incapable of treating you as anything other than who you were when they first met you." Bonnie Tyler, in that moment, was grateful for every single one of them. Mrs. Davies did not ask about the song. She did not say, "I heard it on the radio," or "My granddaughter plays it constantly," or any of the 100 variations of that sentence that Bonnie had been receiving for months from people who wanted to connect with her through the recording rather than with her directly. She asked instead, in the direct, economical way of an 81-year-old woman with a shopping bag and limited patience for preamble, whether Bonnie's mother still made the lamb call the same way. Bonnie blinked. Yes, I think so. Why? Because your mother made the best call on this street and I've been meaning to ask her for the recipe for 30 years, but I keep forgetting," Mrs. Davies said. "You'd think I'd remember given how good it was. You tell her from me. Tell her," Anwen Davies said, "to write it down before one of them takes the secret to the grave, and she'll know what I mean." It should not have been funny. It was one of the funniest things anyone had said to Bonnie in months. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere unguarded, not the polished, camera-ready laugh she had been producing for 6 months of interviews. Mrs. Davies watched her laugh with the faint satisfaction of someone who has made a practical point and is pleased to have it acknowledged. "Are you home for long?" the old woman asked. "Just today, I think," Bonnie said. Mrs. Davies nodded. "Well," she said, with the particular Welsh finality of someone who has said everything there is to say on a subject, "it's good to see you looking well. Mind you eat." She moved off down the street, walking stick clicking on the cobblestones, shopping bag on her arm, at the pace of someone with no intention of hurrying anywhere. Bonnie watched her go. She stood there for rather a long time, watching the small figure in the green coat disappear around the corner of the street. And what she felt, standing on that cobblestone pavement behind the Colliery Welfare Hall, was something she would spend a long time afterward trying to find the right words for. It was not that Mrs. Davies had said anything profound. She had asked about a lamb stew recipe and told her to eat more. By any measurable standard, the exchange was entirely trivial, the kind of conversation that happens between neighbors 100 times a day in every small town everywhere. The verbal equivalent of nodding to someone you know over a garden wall. But there was something in the quality of it, something in the specific way Mrs. Davies had said her name, Gaynor Hopkins, with the accent flat and familiar, the two words carrying the particular weight of a person who has known you since before you were interesting, that had done something Bonnie had not expected and could not have prepared for. It had located her. That was the only word she could find for it. The weeks since New York had left her with a specific obscure feeling of having become slightly displaced from herself, not unhappy, not ungrateful, but floating, unmoored, existing at a slight remove from the person she recognized in mirrors. The song had gone everywhere. The name Bonnie Tyler had gone everywhere. And in going everywhere, both had become, in some quiet, unglamorous sense, slightly impersonal, the property of the world rather than hers, which was the thing people didn't tell you about having a #1 record. It belonged to everyone who played it. It was no longer exactly something she could hold. But Gaynor Hopkins still belonged only to this cobblestone street, this gray sky, this valley, this woman who wanted a recipe for lamb stew and thought she looked thin. Gaynor Hopkins was not #1 in 17 countries. Gaynor Hopkins was just a girl from Skewen whose mother made good call. And that, Bonnie Tyler understood, standing on that pavement on a Tuesday in autumn, was the most valuable thing she owned. She spent the rest of the morning walking. She went no further than the village's edges, no dramatic gesture, no meaningful destination. Just streets she had spent her childhood learning by foot. She walked past the school she had attended, its small concrete yard empty on a weekday morning, past the pub where she had first sung publicly, its sign repainted in the years she'd been away, past the chapel with the lopsided gate, which she thought briefly about stopping to push straight, and then thought better of it, because it had been lopsided since she was 9 years old and there was something about changing it that felt wrong. At some point, on a steep part of the street where the terrace row gave way to a stretch of stone wall and the valley opened up below, she stopped walking and simply looked. The view was what it had always been, the same compression of gray and green, the same distant colliery tower, the same low-pressed sky doing its unhurried work above the whole of it, and there was nothing scenic about it in any conventional sense. No postcard would have chosen this angle. No travel writer would have stopped here. But Bonnie Tyler stood on that stretch of wall for a long time, looking down at the valley that had taught her how to feel things before she had the language to name them, and she thought, this is where it came from, not the voice. She had thought about the voice plenty, the surgery, the hoarseness, the accident of it, the strange gift in the wreckage. She had told that story in 100 interviews and thought about it in more private moments than she could count. She knew where the voice had come from. What she was thinking about now was something else. Something underneath the voice. The understanding that heartache was a real thing and not a lyric, because she had lived beside people who knew real heartache. The knowledge that a room full of people working hard and singing anyway was one of the most honest things a human being could witness. The instinct, built into her so early she could not remember acquiring it, that the truth of a song was not in its polish but in its pressure, in what it cost the singer to deliver it. All of that had come from here, from chapel on Sunday mornings, from a father coming home black-faced and tired and still asking how her day was, from a street that sang together on a Saturday because it knew, collectively, that some things were only bearable if you faced them with other people. The world had given her a song that belonged to everyone. This valley had given her the reason it mattered. She called her mother from a telephone box on the corner of the main road. She had not brought the mobile, had left it deliberately in the hotel, which was its own kind of statement. And her mother answered on the second ring the way she always had, with a voice that managed to convey, in 2 syllables of hello, both slight surprise and the immediate practical implication that she was going to need to put the kettle on. "It's me," Bonnie said. "I know it's you," her mother said. "Where are you?" "The phone box on the corner of High Street." A pause. "Are you coming for your dinner then? If that's all right." "It's always all right," her mother said, in the tone of someone who considers this so obvious that it barely merits saying. "I'm doing call, as it happens." Bonnie laughed again, that same real, unpolished laugh, the one that didn't know it was being listened to. "Mrs. Davies says to write the recipe down before one of you takes it to the grave." A long silence. Then her mother's voice, absolutely dry. "And when Davies has been after my recipe since 1961, she can wait another year." It was, Bonnie thought, walking out of the phone box into the gray and particular air of Skewen, the most purely delightful conversation she had had in months, and nobody in the world would ever make a documentary about it. And that, she decided, was entirely as it should be. She did not stay long. The afternoon was already shortening into early dark by the time she had eaten and sat in her parents' kitchen, and said the things that do not need to be said but need to be sat in, the comfortable, unhurried silence of people who have known each other long enough not to require conversation to feel connected. Her father asked nothing about the charts. Her mother said the call was the same as always and watched to make sure she ate all of it. The house was exactly the same size it had always been, which was the same as saying it had always been smaller than the life she had been living for years. She drove back to the city in the early dark, the motorway unspooling wet and gray-white in her headlights, a different radio station from this morning, and then, on a station out of Cardiff playing the evening chart show, Total Eclipse of the Heart, her own voice filling the car with its particular hoarse, driven, surviving quality. She did not turn it off. She listened to the whole thing, start to finish, which she had not done in weeks. It sounded different than it had been sounding in her head. Bigger, less hers, and more the world's. But that was all right. She had decided today, on a cobblestone street behind a welfare hall, that the difference between what belonged to her and what belonged to the world was not something to be frightened of. What belonged to the world was the song. What belonged to her was the reason the song could exist at all. The street, the chapel, the valley, the lamb call, the woman in the green coat who had not asked about the charts. Gaynor Hopkins, Mrs. Davies had said. 2 words, flat and certain, carrying 30 years of ordinary Tuesday mornings. That was the one thing, in the end, that the charts could not reach. Bonnie Tyler would go on to make more records, play more stages, endure more interviews that began with the same question and ended with the same footage. She would represent her country at Eurovision. She would watch the song chart again every time there was an eclipse anywhere in the world. She would grow older in front of an audience that had decided what era she belonged to, and she would keep singing anyway, which was, if you thought about it clearly, the only thing she had ever actually done. She died on the 9th of July, 2026, at the age of 75. Within hours, Total Eclipse of the Heart was on every platform, in every country, exactly as it had been 43 years earlier. The world pressed play and heard the voice, cracked and whole at once, broken open and surviving, and felt something it could not name. Gaynor Hopkins from Skewen in the Neath Valley would have known exactly what that feeling was. She had learned it on a street where a woman had a piano in her doorway on Saturday evenings, where a father came home tired and asked anyway, where the sky pressed down low and the singing went up anyway to meet it. Some things, it turns out, only make sense if you know where they came from. And the place they came from will always know who you are, even on a Tuesday morning when the rest of the world is busy calling you famous.